Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, Gulf countries are keeping a close eye on nuclear negotiations with Iran. So what would a signed agreement mean for stability in the region? So the nuclear negotiations are going on right now with Iran in Switzerland. So many interested parties paying attention. And online, Malika Bilal, what's the conversation?
Well, we actually have Iranians tweeting us. We also have people from the Gulf states, and they're all kind of weighing in with their opinions. But today on our app, we're asking if a nuclear deal with Iran would make the Middle East more stable. You can download the app and you can send us your responses on that and interact with our show in real time.
And right here in the studio, we have Jamal Abdi. And Jamal is a policy director at the National Iranian American Council. Jamal, it's great to have you here in the stream.
Thanks for having me.
And we will hear much more from you in just a moment. Sit tight.
My name is Abdulaziz. I'm a Bahraini political activist, and I'm happy to be on this stream.
Negotiations over Iran's nuclear energy program are being very closely watched by countries in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC. They're worried that a deal would bolster Iran's increasing influence in the region. Riyadh sees Tehran's involvement in Arab countries, particularly its backing of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, its support for Shia militias in Iraq, and its ties to the Houthis in Yemen as particularly troubling. US Secretary of State John Kerry flew to the Saudi capital last week to ease these fears and assure the GCC that a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear program is in their best interest and would bring stability to the Middle East. Now, to help us talk more about this, we're joined by Khaled Batafi. He is a senior writer at the Saudi Gazette and an assistant professor at Al Faisal University. Alian Tabatabai is a visiting professor at Georgetown University, and Ibrahim Katabi is a Yemen affairs analyst. So great to have you all here in the stream. Jamal, if we were just going to lay it out in terms of what could be the concerns of people who are worried that this nuclear deal is actually going to happen at the end of March, what do you think the top concern is? Because you're behind this deal, this negotiation.
Sure. I think there are a lot of false concerns, frankly. I think that what this nuclear deal, this is a historic deal. This is a historic diplomatic achievement. I think there are a lot of people who are concerned because they like the status quo. Now, the question is, will a nuclear deal threaten the stability in the Middle East? I would respond, what stability? What stability does this threaten? This deal is turning the page on decades of instability and presents an open door to actually resolving a lot of these issues that have cropped up over the past few years or the past few decades. It's a step in the right direction.
All right, so concern maybe number one is the idea that nuclear capacity, Iran could eventually maybe have its own nuclear arsenal. How would you address that?
Well, what the deal does is it would last for 10 to 15 years, and it actually puts restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. I think the concern is that this somehow legitimizes Iran's nuclear program, whereas some people would prefer that we have a zero nuclear policy, and that's just not possible.
Yeah.
But this deal, it actually addresses the concerns about Iran's nuclear program, but in so doing, it does require that we actually come to an agreement, and that scares a lot of people.
Ibrahim, are you scared about that prospect?
This is me. I think the deal, any deal that leads to an end of a nuclear program is a good deal. However, and I think the Iranian situation is slightly different. We have a serious issue now in the Middle East where Iran is very much engaged in a sectarian fight in Syria and Yemen and Iraq and elsewhere. So basically, like I said, I think an end to the sanctioning of the Iranian people, and it is important here to differentiate between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime, just like we do with the U.S. administrations and also the American people, because it's completely different.
But the Iranian people are not at the negotiating table, so we're talking about the Iranian regime right now.
And we know the Iranian regimes have their hands are full of bullets and a lot of different places in the Middle East. We've seen recently that the Iran is supporting the Houthis in Yemen, which is a militia group, and recently, a few weeks ago, signed a deal between the Houthi militia sign a deal of flying 24 flights between Sana'a and Iran without respect to the Yemeni people, without respect or regards to the Yemeni authorities, basically working with the militia on the ground. 2 days ago, the Iranian advisor to the Iranian president, Ali Younisi, said that now Iran is regaining its empire, basically, and Baghdad, the Iraqi capital.
Right, so Ibrahim, connect the dots for us, Ibrahim, then. So all of these things, these instances that you mentioned where Iran is as operating outside of its national boundaries, what has that got to do with a potential nuclear deal at the end of March?
Like I said, I think a deal is good for the Iranians, but how is that going to look like for people in the region, like the Arab countries,
right.
Groups like in Syria and Yemen and Iraq? They will see that as a winning game for the Iranian regime, and that whatever Iran is doing in the Middle East right now is the right thing, and that they got the West and their knees, and how the Iranian regime will use that as a propaganda to basically fuel more fights in the Middle East. But I think...
Can I jump in?
Ariane, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there are two issues here. As you mentioned, there's one that has to do with the nuclear negotiations that are ongoing and that are going to achieve exactly what everyone in the region wants, which is to limit Iran's nuclear program, to reassure the entire region and the world that Iran is indeed pursuing a nuclear program for peaceful purposes and not developing a nuclear weapon. And it would do that without the other option, which is a war. And nobody really wants a war in a region that is already increasingly fragile, where you have a number of states that are fragile or failing, Yemen being one of them, Syria, Iraq. A potential war or escalation to military conflict between Iran, Israel, maybe backed by Saudi Arabia, is not in any way something that would reinforce regional security. So I think a deal would be good not only for Iran, but also for the rest of the region and broader regional security and stability. Now, in terms of what Iran is doing in the Middle East, there are obviously, everyone has their own views on what Iran is doing. A lot of it has to do, of course, with the fact that what is going on in Iraq directly influences Iran's own security and stability, which is why Iran has been putting so much effort, so many resources into Iraq. Now, what it's doing in Yemen is arguably different. Iran doesn't have the same level of strategic interest. Yemen's national security, or Iran's national security, is not directly linked to Yemen. So it's doing things there that may or may not be relevant to Iranian security.
Okay, Ariane, just give me a pause for a moment, because I know the community wants to join in the conversation with you. Malika?
Well, there are a few people who are kind of contradicting what you are saying, Ariane. There's this tweet from Ashkan who says, I agree that a deal should make the Middle East more stable, but it seems that a majority of states are against it. And this next person tweeted in the reason that Gulf states are against this. Doshima says, taking into consideration of how Tehran effectively, quote unquote, infiltrated the politics of key states like Iraq, Syria, and even Bahrain. So Khalid, I'm going to direct that to you. This person is referring to support by proxy of armed groups in the region. What do you make of that idea?
It's more than proxies. Your guest was talking about preventing wars. We are at war right now. Iranians are waging wars everywhere around them, whether in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Bahrain, and they were even trying tricks in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. So that is happening while they are under pressure and under the constraints of economic sanctions. And just imagine when their hands are really free and they have the money and the whatever agreement they had with the United States under the table to allow them to do even more of what they are doing. Imagine what could happen in the Middle East. And tell me, wherever Iran has a hand, and it's a stable place. Iran intervened in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. Everywhere they intervened, there is destruction and killing, and people are dying. In Syria, 250,000 people, 250,000, 10 millions are out of their homes, and many are injured, and the destruction is unbelievable. In Yemen, everywhere they had a hand, it's destructive, whether
Kelly,
yes.
There's also some. I just want to give you a little pushback because give me a second. Let me finish my sentence here. Have a look here on my laptop here. I'm showing a headline: the military intervention that the world forgot. I'm going to scoot down here, and it just reminds us that Saudi and Emirati forces continue to police Bahrain, and Saudi forces were involved in how the Bahrain revolution went. Saudi is a big power in the Middle East, and they also intervene in different places around the world. So maybe we're talking about a geopolitical situation that might be a little bit evened out if Iran felt less threatened. What's your take on this, Jamal?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in the region, anybody in the region with clean hands should raise their hand.
The comparison is wrong here, because
yeah, go ahead, Jamal. So we have a little gap, so I apologize about that. Yeah, please do it. It's a gap between us here and you in Saudi. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. You said the intervention of the Saudi. Did you say that in Bahrain? It wasn't an intervention of the Saudi. We have an agreement within the GCC countries that if any countries is facing trouble and the government needed help, the rest of the GCC, we have a united army, and it's in GCC, Al Jazeera, and the government in Bahrain, which is part of the GCC, asked for help and got it. That's not the situation in Yemen. Nobody asked for Iranian forces and the Revolutionary Guards to help or to do anything. I don't remember any Lebanese government asking for help to Hezbollah and or in anywhere or in Bahrain, for example. That's different when you intervene in countries and support sectarian groups and people who belonged or give you their allegiance to Al-Wali al-Faqih, Ali Khamenei, above the allegiance to their country and their government leadership.
Okay, Khalid, I hear the point that you're making. Jamal,
whether it's Hezbollah or Ansarullah or whatever.
I hear the point you're making. Jamal, what did you want to add?
Okay, well, look, one country's meddling and interference is another country's diplomatic pact and attempts to add stability, whether it's in Bahrain or Syria. Look at what's happening right now. What's happening with ISIS? Who's responsible for the rise of ISIS? And who's fighting ISIS right now? Iran is actually involved in trying to counter that group. And we can sit here, we can go over the litany of complaints that the Saudis are interfering or the Iranians are interfering, but what is the bottom line? It's that we have the chance to get a deal that prevents an Iranian nuclear weapon. And some people, with all due respect, are saying we should not pursue this deal that takes care of the nuclear problem because we have complaints about other activities. This is a recipe to continue this standoff, to continue the interference, instead of actually beginning to come to a political agreement that can start to resolve these problems.
I wanted to give a view from inside Iran. I just want to share this because we got a tweet from inside Iran, and that's not an easy feat. So this is Nima, who writes, I'm in Iran. Public opinion is divided. A majority want a deal because of harsh economic situation. Extremists, he said, oppose the deal. But he pushes back against the idea that Khalid was raising earlier about Iran being free to do what it wants if this deal passes. Nima says, anyone who thinks international pressure on Iran goes along with the nuclear deal is wrong. Missile capability, human rights, all of those issues still remain. Ariane, could you address that there will still be international pressure on Iran?
Yeah, that's certainly the case, and that's one of the reasons why those who are freaking out already about a nuclear deal and normalization with Iran, because that is what people are freaking out about in the region. It's the possibility of some sort of rapprochement between Iran and the United States, and the Saudis and others losing their privileged place in sort of the, in the region with the U.S. Are wrong about that. International pressure is not going to disappear overnight because the nuclear deal has been addressed. This is a much more fundamental issue that will continue to exist regardless of what happens in Geneva in the next few weeks.
Ibrahim?
I have something to add to what the other individual in the studio was saying, is that I don't think anyone should be against the deal, but I think the deal should include that hands off the Middle East. Iran should stop funding and fueling sectarian wars in the Middle East. I think this is part of the stability of the Middle East. This is what we want. This is what everyone wants. We shouldn't be just addressing one part of the issue and leaving the main one out of the package. So that's one thing to focus on. And with regards to the comments about, look who we fighting in Iraq and who created ISIS in Iraq. Yes, the Bush administration going to Iraq was wrong, and the one that mainly created the disaster. But Iran came in, the Iranian regime came in, supported sectarian regime, the sectarian regime in Iraq, started, killing Sunnis and tribes, and basically rallied up all the Sunni tribes to join ISIS, and that's how
Ibrahim,
ISIS started to begin with just
regard to
because
this
of the
issue,
Iranian sectarian war.
Yeah. Nobody's denying that Iran has a role in all of these areas, or that these other countries have a role in these other areas. I like that you're acknowledging that this nuclear deal should go forward, that we should sign this nuclear deal. The notion that we are now going to add every regional problem into the negotiations, and heck, why don't we just throw every issue under the sun? We can make sure that it addresses every problem we've ever had with Iran. That is the recipe to killing a deal. And I think we need to understand we're not going to achieve everything in one fell swoop. This is the beginning of a diplomatic process. This is a first step. If we play our cards right, if the people if the countries in the region play their cards right, we can actually begin to engage on these other issues. We can engage on what's happening in Syria. We can engage on what's happening in Iraq, instead of the status quo, which is a status quo that hardliners in Iran like, that people in Saudi Arabia like, the status quo that is unfair to everybody in the region and only fosters this violence and this instability.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So one thing is people in the region often complain that the West is interfering with their business. So now what you're suggesting is that the P5+1, that is 4 Western countries, Russia and China, should sit down with Iran and basically tell Iran what to do and not to do in the region. So that's Western interference, right? You're encouraging Western interference. The second thing that I want to raise, going along with what Jamal was saying, is that if there is a deal, the current team who's in the foreign ministry, that is the team of Javad Zarif, who is pro-engagement, who Zarif's first op-ed as foreign minister was actually in a Saudi outlet. He has been wanting to engage with the rest of the region. That team will stay in power, and that team will have the political capital to be able to engage with the region. Isn't that what you want? Wouldn't it be better to encourage the team, to help the team that wants to engage with the rest of the region stay there and do that, rather than have the P5+1 sit there and say, well, here, Ron, you should do this and you shouldn't do this?
Let me add a little something extra to the conversation via way of my laptop. So have a look here. Khalid, I'm just bringing this straight to you, so just give me a moment. So here, I'm looking at an Al Jazeera story. We reported this quite rightly. Kerry in Riyadh to calm Gulf fears on Iran nuclear deal, and that's US Secretary of State John Kerry. So Khalid, the idea that the US wants to make Saudi Arabia feel comfortable, how comfortable is Saudi Arabia feeling right now about this potential nuclear deal with Iran? Khalid?
We have another example, actually, when there is the chemical weapons issue in Syria. In the beginning, U.S. took the right way of solving the whole problem at once, but then they decided to just solve the chemical weapon issue. The chemical weapon issue is just a small part of the deal of what's going on, and it gave the legitimacy to the Bashar regime, and it give it a free hand in Syria. The chemical weapons killed hundreds of people, but the other traditional bombing and traditional way of killing killed a quarter of a million and injured so many people.
So let me just to make sure that I don't get lost here.
Focus on one part
Khaled,
of the problem
just give me a moment here, so we don't talk about all of the region's issues here, but something very specific. John Kerry, the Secretary of State for the US, came to Saudi Arabia to make your king feel more comfortable. Did it work? Did that visit work?
Not just yeah.
But also the GCC
well,
as well.
But
did it work, Khaled? We're about to run out of time on this
GCC,
show. I'm really curious about this.
And the king about a host. Yes, about a host of issues related to Iran. It's not about just the nuclear.
So he wanted to reassure the GCC.
We all agree with that, yani.
Did he do a good job at reassuring the GCC that the Iran nuclear?
About their stand on the issue about the war games Iran is doing in the region.
I want to bring this idea again. This is from Hassan. He writes,
Iran
remains. I hear you speaking, but I just want to bring this in before we run out of time. Hassan says, Iran remains a key regional player irrespective of Saudi concerns. The P5+1, which we've already mentioned, that deal can be a foundation to resolving other regional issues. So, Jamal, do you think that this could lead to you talked about ISIL or ISIS being one of those issues, but do you think it could lead to a resolving of other skirmishes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to the Syria example, Iran wasn't party to those conversations. They were locked out of those conversations, thanks in part to intransigence on the Saudi side and problems on the US side with having them in the room. That led to us not being able to actually deal with what's going on in Syria. There's no political solution in sight because the stakeholders are not invited to have any role in the process. If we can take care of this nuclear issue, if we can take care of this problem that has blocked the United States and its allies from actually engaging with Iran, then we can start to deal with some of these other issues. The alternative is we either have what we have in Syria right now, which is a continuation of the conflict and the killing and the violence, or you have the US can go in and bomb. And I like that others are volunteering the United States to go ahead and do that, but I don't think the American people want that, and it's not something that I think is desirable for anybody who's serious about resolving these issues.
Sure. Ibrahim, if we fast forward to the end of March and there is a deal or no deal, what do you think the consequences might be for the region, for the Middle East?
I honestly think that the U.S. and the Gulf countries' relation, mainly Saudi Arabia, I think this deal would be the straw that broke the camel's back, and I think that would maybe lead the Gulf countries to react negatively and just to start doing the way the Iranian regime is doing, which is supporting militias in the Middle East. And because what's happening right now, the militias that Iran is supporting in the region is basically threatening the existence of countries like Yemen, like Saudi Arabia, like Kuwait, like Qatar. So basically, this is a serious issue. It's not just a nuclear deal. We have the Iranian regime has to show some sort of a goodwill by trying to resolve the issues in Yemen and Syria peacefully by not supporting militias and by not, by telling people not to engage in sectarian war. But this is not happening. They actually, like I said 2 days ago, the Iranian advisor was saying that this is now we're regaining the Persian Empire and Iraq is now part of Iran, and they have a more ambitious than basically the nuclear weapon. I think the nuclear weapon is
you're listening to Ibrahim Al-Khattabi. He is one of our guests on the show. We had Jamal Abdi, Aryan Tabatabai, and Khaled Batafi. Thank you very much to all of our guests for being part of this discussion. Let's move forward and see what we're going to be talking about on the next AJ stream. Well, Kurdish female fighters are taking on ISIL, but they're also battling for equal rights for women and the Kurdish people. But are they winning? We'll be discussing that on the next AJ stream. Until then, I'll see you online. Thanks for watching.